The crack of gunfire echoed across the dusty plains as Abigail Zimmerman pressed her back against the weathered barn door, her heart pounding in her chest like a runaway stagecoach. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life in Whispering Creek, Colorado, had quickly soured into a nightmare from which she couldn't seem to wake. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her. The wound stung, but it wasn't nearly as painful as the betrayal that had led her here. Tears blurred her vision as she peered through a crack in the wooden planks, watching as her stepfather's men scoured the property, determined to drag her back to a fate worse than death. "Check the barn," a gruff voice commanded, sending ice through her veins. Abigail frantically searched for an escape route. The back door stood ajar, leading into the dense forest that bordered the property. It was her only chance. Gathering her tattered skirts, she took a deep breath and ran, each step carrying her deeper into the wilderness, away from the life that had been forced upon her. She didn't know how long she ran before her legs gave out. Collapsing against a tree trunk, Abigail finally allowed herself to sob, the weight of her situation crushing down on her shoulders. Her mother's death 6 months ago had left her at the mercy of Clayton Pierce, a man whose gambling debts had led him to promise Abigail's hand to Roman Blackwood, the most feared man in the territory. The snapping of a twig jerked her back to awareness. Panic seized her as she scrambled to her feet, ready to flee once more. "Whoa there," a deep voice called out, gentle but firm. "I ain't gonna hurt you, miss." Through the trees emerged a tall figure leading a chestnut mare. The setting sun cast long shadows across his features, but there was no mistaking the cowboy hat perched atop his head or the concerned frown that creased his brow. "Stay back," Abigail warned, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound brave. The stranger raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Name's Isaac Fuller, madam, just passing through when I heard the commotion. You're bleeding." Abigail's hand instinctively went to her wounded arm. "It's nothing." Isaac took a cautious step forward. "Doesn't look like nothing to me." "I've got supplies in my saddlebag. Let me help you." Something in his eyes, a warmth, a sincerity she hadn't encountered in far too long, made Abigail hesitate. Behind her, shouts echoed through the trees. Her pursuers were getting closer. "They're coming for me," she whispered, fear tightening her throat. Understanding dawned on Isaac's face. Without another word, he closed the distance between them, offering his hand. "Then we'd best not be here when they arrive." Abigail stared at his outstretched hand, torn between caution and desperation. The voices grew louder. "Trust me," Isaac urged with a silent prayer. Abigail placed her hand in his. In one swift motion, Isaac helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with practiced ease. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as they galloped away from danger, into the gathering darkness. The stars littered the vast Colorado sky like scattered diamonds as Isaac finally reined in his horse near a small creek. They'd ridden hard for hours, changing direction multiple times to throw off any potential pursuit. Abigail's body ached from the journey, but the distance from her stepfather's men was worth every moment of discomfort. "We'll rest here for the night," Isaac announced, sliding from the saddle and reaching up to help her down. His hands were strong yet gentle on her waist, and Abigail felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as her feet touched the ground. She swayed slightly, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. "Easy there," Isaac steadied her with a concerned look. "When's the last time you ate something, miss?" "Zimmerman, Abigail Zimmerman," she replied, suddenly realizing she hadn't properly introduced herself. "And I can't remember." Isaac's frown deepened. "Well, Miss Zimmerman, that won't do at all. I've got some jerky and hardtack in my pack. It ain't much, but it'll keep your strength up." As Isaac busied himself setting up a small camp, Abigail sank down beside the creek, watching her reflection ripple in the moonlit water. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger, hair disheveled, eyes wide with lingering fear, a smear of dirt across one cheek. "May I?" Isaac's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He knelt beside her, holding a clean cloth and a small bottle. "That arm needs tending." Abigail nodded, allowing him to roll up her sleeve and examine the wound. His touch was careful, clinical almost, but she couldn't help noticing the calluses on his fingertips, the quiet strength in his hands as he cleaned and bandaged the graze. "You're good at this," she observed. A shadow crossed his face. "Spent time as a field medic during the war. Picked up a few things I wish I hadn't had to. The war. But you don't seem old enough to have joined up when I was 16, he interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "Told them I was 18. They didn't ask too many questions but then needed all the men they could get." Abigail studied him in the firelight. He couldn't be more than 26 now, but there was an oldness to his eyes that spoke of things seen and survived. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me." Isaac finished wrapping her arm and sat back on his heels. "Want to tell me who those men were and why they were chasing you?" Abigail stared into the small fire he'd built, the memories washing over her like a cold rain. "My stepfather, Clayton Pierce. He arranged for me to marry Roman Blackwood to settle a gambling debt." Isaac let out a low whistle. "Roman Blackwood, the cattle baron, and worse," Abigail confirmed bitterly. "He's known for how he treats women. My own mother warned me about him before she passed, and your father died in a mining accident when I was 12. My mother remarried 2 years later thinking Pierce would provide for us." She laughed without humor. "He provided all right, provided himself with my mother's inheritance, and then provided me as payment to Blackwood when the money ran out." Isaac's jaw tightened. "So you ran." "I had no choice." The wedding was set for tomorrow. Abigail wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back a shiver that had nothing to do with the night air. "Blackwood made it clear what kind of wife he expected me to be." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. "You're safe now," Isaac finally said, his voice a low rumble that somehow made the words feel like a solemn vow. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." As Abigail settled onto the bedroll he'd provided, she found herself studying the cowboy across the fire. In the span of a few hours, this stranger had risked his own safety to help her without asking for anything in return. Such kindness was rare in her experience. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyelids growing heavy despite her racing thoughts. "I've got a friend in Silverton, runs a trading post. He can help us figure out your next steps." "Us," the word slipped out before she could stop it. Isaac's eyes met hers across the flames, steady and resolute. "I'm not in the habit of leaving folks in trouble, Miss Zimmerman, not when I can help." Something warm unfurled in Abigail's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. As sleep claimed her, she found herself wondering about the journey ahead and about the enigmatic cowboy who'd appeared just when she needed him most. Dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Abigail woke to the aroma of coffee brewing over a small fire. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a start. "Morning," Isaac greeted, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Hope you don't mind it strong." "Only way I know how to make it." Abigail accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "Thank you for everything." Isaac shrugged, a hint of color rising to his tan cheeks. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," Abigail corrected softly, "not anyone." Their eyes met over the rim of her cup, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first tentative threads of trust being woven. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Isaac was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, voice low and urgent as he moved toward the tree line. Abigail's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him disappear among the foliage. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. A male voice called out something she couldn't quite make out. Long minutes passed. Just as Abigail was considering whether to flee or remain hidden, Isaac emerged from the trees, his expression grim. "We need to move," he said, already gathering their meager belongings. That was a ranch hand from the Double B spread. Said there's a group of men offering good money for information about a young woman and the man helping her. Abigail's blood ran cold. "Did he recognize you?" "Don't think so. Told him I was tracking a stray horse." Isaac tightened the cinch on his saddle with quick, efficient movements. "But it won't take long for word to spread. We need to change our plans." "Where will we go?" Abigail asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Isaac paused, considering. "There's an old mining camp about 20 miles west of here. It's mostly abandoned now, but a few folks still pan for gold in the area. We can lay low there for a day or two while I figure things out." They rode hard through the morning, keeping to less traveled paths and avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted. Isaac seemed to know the terrain well, navigating through dense forests and along rocky ridgelines with confidence. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon where a small stream cut through the rock. Isaac dismounted, leading his horse to water. "We'll rest here a spell," he said, offering Abigail a hand down. "Horse needs a break, and so do you." As they shared a simple meal of jerky and dried fruit, Abigail found herself studying Isaac more closely. There was a quietness to him that she found comforting, not the awkward silence of someone with nothing to say, but the measured calm of a man who chose his words carefully. "You know this area well," she observed. Isaac nodded, his gaze sweeping over the canyon walls. "Spent most of my life in these parts. After the war, I came back and worked as a guide for a while, taking folks through the mountains. And now," a shadow crossed his face, "now I mostly keep to myself, do odd jobs, help out at ranches during roundup, break horses when someone needs it." Abigail sensed there was more to the story, much more, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their private sorrows. She of all people understood that. "What about you?" Isaac asked, turning the conversation away from himself. "What were your plans before all this?" Abigail plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "I wanted to teach. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She taught me to read and write, to love books and learning." "You'd make a fine teacher," Isaac said with such simple conviction that Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she murmured. "Though I don't see how that's possible now. Even if we evade my stepfather in Blackwood, I have no money, no references." "One problem at a time," Isaac advised, standing and brushing dust from his pants. "First, we get to safety, then we figure out the rest." As they continued their journey, the terrain grew more rugged. The path narrowed, forcing them to ride single file along a precipitous ledge. Below them, the canyon floor seemed impossibly distant. "Stay close to the wall," Isaac called over his shoulder. "Trail gets tricky up ahead." No sooner had he spoken than a rattlesnake slithered onto the path directly in front of his horse. The animal reared in panic, whinnying in terror. Isaac fought to control the frightened horse, but the narrow trail offered little room to maneuver. Abigail watched in horror as horse and rider teetered at the edge of the drop. For one heart-stopping moment, it seemed certain they would plummet to the rocks below. Then Isaac somehow managed to leap from the saddle, landing hard on the trail as his horse scrambled back from the edge. "Isaac?" Abigail cried, dismounting and rushing to where he lay, momentarily stunned by the fall. He groaned, sitting up slowly. "I'm all right. Just knocked the wind out of me." But as he tried to stand, he fell back with a sharp hiss of pain. "My ankle. Think I might have twisted it." Abigail helped him to a sitting position against the canyon wall, then carefully examined his ankle. It was already beginning to swell. "Can you ride?" she asked, worrying her bottom lip between her teeth. Isaac tested the joint, wincing. "If I have to, but we'd best find somewhere to stop soon." The mining camp Isaac had mentioned was still hours away. Abigail scanned their surroundings, remembering a small cabin they'd passed earlier, tucked away in a grove of aspens. "There was a cabin back a ways," she said decisively. "We should go there." Isaac looked like he wanted to argue, but another attempt to put weight on his injured ankle changed his mind. With Abigail's help, he managed to remount his now calm horse. The journey back to the cabin was slow and painful. By the time they arrived, dusk was settling over the mountains, and Isaac's face was drawn with pain. The cabin appeared long abandoned, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow bed frame covered in a dusty mattress. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter for the night. Abigail helped Isaac inside, settling him on the bed before returning to care for the horses. By the time she'd finished, gathered firewood, and returned to the cabin, twilight had deepened to night. Isaac watched from the bed as she efficiently built a fire, the golden light illuminating her determined expression. "You're good at that." "My father taught me," she replied, not looking up from her task. "He said a woman should know how to fend for herself, not depend on a man for everything." "Wise man, your father," the fire caught, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. Abigail sat back on her heels, satisfaction evident in her smile. "There, now let me see that ankle." Isaac's injury wasn't as bad as they'd feared, a sprain rather than a break, but it would still need time to heal. Abigail wrapped it tightly with strips torn from her petticoat, trying to ignore the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers or the way his breath caught when she tightened the makeshift bandage. "Where did you learn to do this?" Isaac asked as she secured the final knot. "My mother fell ill often after my father died. I learned to care for her." Abigail's voice faltered, not that it made any difference in the end. Isaac's hand covered hers, surprising her with its gentleness. "I'm sorry." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something shifted in the air between them, something fragile and new, like the first green shoot breaking through winter soil. Abigail was the first to look away, suddenly conscious of their proximity. "You should rest. I'll keep watch." "No need for that tonight," Isaac said. "This place is far enough off the main trails. We're safe here for now." Safe. Such a simple word, yet it had been so long since Abigail had truly felt its meaning. As she settled on the floor near the fire, wrapped in Isaac's spare blanket, she found herself studying his profile in the flickering light. "Thank you," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake to hear it. But Isaac's eyes opened, finding hers across the small space that separated them. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart skip a beat. "I know," she replied softly, "but I want to." Outside, an owl called into the night. Inside, two strangers, no longer quite so strange to one another, drifted into sleep, unaware of how their lives had already begun to intertwine in ways neither could have imagined. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin's single window, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Abigail woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. The events of the past 2 days came rushing back as her gaze fell on Isaac, still asleep on the bed, one arm flung above his head. In slumber, the lines of worry had eased from his face, making him appear younger, more vulnerable. A lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and Abigail fought a strange impulse to brush it back. Instead, she rose quietly and slipped outside to check on the horses. The mountain air was crisp and clean, filling her lungs and clearing her mind. For the first time since her escape, Abigail allowed herself to truly consider her situation. She was a woman alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, fleeing from powerful enemies with resources and connections. Even if they managed to evade capture, what future awaited her? No respectable household would hire a woman with no references and a scandalous past. Marriage, once her expected path, now seemed an impossibility. Yet despite these grim realities, Abigail felt a curious lightness in her heart. For the first time in years, she was making her own choices, charting her own course. Whatever happened next, it would be of her own doing. The creak of the cabin door announced Isaac's presence. He stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch fashioned from a tree branch. "You shouldn't be up," Abigail chided, hurrying to his side. Isaac grimaced. Needed to stretch. How are the horses? Rested and watered. How's your ankle? Better than yesterday. I think we can ride out by noon. Abigail frowned. Are you certain? Another day's rest would. We can't stay, Isaac interrupted, his expression grave. I've been thinking. Blackwood's men will be combing these mountains. This cabin is too exposed. But your injury, I've ridden with worse. There was something in his tone that discouraged further argument. We need to reach the mining camp. There's safety in numbers, and my friend there can get word to the marshal in Durango. Abigail wanted to protest, but recognized the wisdom in his words. They were vulnerable here, too easily discovered. They departed shortly after a meager breakfast, with Isaac insisting on riding his own horse despite Abigail's concerns. The journey was slow, with Isaac's injury forcing them to take frequent breaks. Each time they stopped, Abigail noticed him scanning their back trail, his hand never far from his revolver. You think they're following us? She finally asked during one such pause. Isaac's gaze met hers, serious and steady. I think we'd be fools not to assume they are. The frankness of his answer sent a chill through her. What happens if they find us? They won't, Isaac said with quiet determination. But if they do, I won't let them take you. There was a fierce protectiveness in his voice that both comforted and unsettled Abigail. In the short time they'd known each other, this man had risked his life for her, injured himself helping her, and now seemed prepared to face down armed men on her behalf. Why? She asked softly. Why are you doing all this for me? Isaac looked away, his jaw working as though wrestling with some inner conflict. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Because 6 years ago I couldn't save someone who needed saving, I won't make that mistake again. Before Abigail could ask what he meant, Isaac urged his horse forward, effectively ending the conversation. She followed, mind swirling with questions she didn't dare voice. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow valley where a small stream tumbled over rocks worn smooth by time and water. Scattered along its banks were the remnants of the mining camp, a dozen or so structures in various states of disrepair, with only a few showing signs of current habitation. Doesn't look like much, Isaac admitted as they approached, but old Pete's place should be comfortable enough. The place in question turned out to be a combination trading post and saloon at the far end of the camp. A weathered sign proclaiming supplies and spirits hung askew over the door, and a hitching post out front accommodated 3 other horses. As they dismounted, the door swung open to reveal a barrel-chested man with a magnificent white beard and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Well, I'll be damned, he exclaimed, his gaze moving from Isaac to Abigail and back again. Isaac Fuller, as I live and breathe. And with a lady friend, no less. Isaac clasped the older man's hand. Pete, good to see you. Likewise, boy. Pete's expression sobered as he noted Isaac's makeshift crutch. Trouble, some, Isaac acknowledged. This is Miss Abigail Zimmerman. Abigail, meet Peter Holloway, the orneriest old coot this side of the Mississippi. Pete swept off his hat and executed a surprisingly graceful bow. Miss Zimmerman, any friend of Isaac's is welcome here, even if he does have terrible manners. Despite her exhaustion, Abigail couldn't help but smile at the old man's gallantry. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Holloway. Pete ushered them inside, where the trading post's front room held an eclectic assortment of goods tools, clothing, preserved foods, ammunition, and other necessities. A doorway at the back led to what appeared to be the saloon portion of the establishment, currently empty save for a lone figure nursing a drink in the corner. Martha, Pete bellowed, causing Abigail to start. Company. A stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. Her stern expression softened visibly at the sight of Isaac. Land's sake, boy, you look like something the cat dragged in, she declared, immediately taking charge. Pete, stop standing there like a fence post and get these folks something to eat. Miss, you come with me. I've got a room upstairs where you can wash up and rest. Before Abigail could protest, she found herself swept upstairs by Martha's efficient mothering. The small room under the eaves was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the stream. "Been a while since we had a lady guest," Martha said, pouring warm water into the basin. "Most who pass through here are minors or men running from something or someone." There was a question in her statement that Abigail chose not to address directly. "It's very kind of you to accommodate us, Mrs. Just Martha will do, and it's no trouble. Any friend of Isaac's is welcome here." She paused, studying Abigail with shrewd eyes. "He's a good man, that one." "Best I know. Been through more than his share of hardship, though." Abigail's curiosity got the better of her. "Has he known you and Mr. Holloway long?" "Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Martha confirmed, laying out a clean towel. "His daddy and Pete rode together in the Rangers before settling in these parts. After Isaac came back from the war, he stayed with us for a spell. Needed time to find himself again, I reckon." The woman's words offered a glimpse into Isaac's past that both satisfied and deepened Abigail's curiosity. Before she could ask more, Martha patted her shoulder. "Rest a bit, then come down for supper. Pete's stew isn't fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." Left alone, Abigail gratefully washed away the dust of travel, then sank onto the bed, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. Instead, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, darkness had fallen. For a moment, panic seized her. How long had she slept? What if they needed to move on? Then she remembered where they were, and the panic subsided. Voices drifted up from below, male voices engaged in serious conversation. Moving quietly to the door, Abigail opened it just enough to hear more clearly. "Offering $500 for information," Pete was saying, his tone grim. "That's a powerful temptation for folks around here." "Anyone asking questions yet?" Isaac's voice, not directly, but word travels fast. "2 riders passed through yesterday, headed toward Durango." Didn't say much, but they were asking about travelers in the area. A third voice joined in, unfamiliar, with a slight accent Abigail couldn't place. "Blackwood's men, most likely. He's not a man who accepts being crossed." "No," Isaac agreed, "he isn't." "So what's your plan?" Pete asked. "Can't hide here forever. Sooner or later someone will talk." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the clink of glasses. Finally, Isaac spoke. "I need to get her somewhere safe, somewhere Blackwood can't reach her." "California?" the third man suggested. "Too far," Pete countered. "They'd never make it, not with every bounty hunter and hired gun between here and there looking for them." "What about north, Montana Territory, or even Canada?" "Maybe," Isaac said thoughtfully, "but first I need to deal with Pierce. As long as he's determined to hand Abigail over to Blackwood, she'll never be truly free." Abigail's heart quickened at his words. The idea that Isaac was planning to confront her stepfather, possibly Blackwood, as well, sent fear coursing through her veins. She pushed the door open fully and descended the stairs, drawing the attention of all 3 men. "No," she said firmly, looking directly at Isaac. "I won't have you risking your life again, not for me." Isaac rose from his chair, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, something that made her pulse flutter despite her fear. "Abigail, I heard enough," she interrupted. "You're planning to confront Clayton, aren't you, and probably Blackwood too." The third man, a lean, weathered individual with a silver streak in his dark hair, whistled softly. "She's got spirit, Isaac, I'll give her that." Abigail turned to him, drawing herself up to her full height. "And you are Miguel Vasquez," he replied with a slight bow. "Former Texas Ranger, current associate of these 2 old fools, and at your service, señorita." Despite her agitation, Abigail found herself warming to the man's courtly manner. "Mr. Vasquez, perhaps you can talk some sense into Mr. Fuller. Whatever he's planning is too dangerous." Miguel exchanged a look with Pete before addressing Abigail. "With respect, Miss Zimmerman, danger is not something new to any of us, and sometimes facing it directly is the only way to be truly free of it." "He's right," Isaac said quietly, moving to stand before her. As long as Pierce and Blackwood are hunting you, you'll never know peace, always looking over your shoulder, always afraid. Then I'll go somewhere they can't find me, Abigail insisted. Change my name, start over. Isaac shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. That's not living, Abigail. That's hiding. You deserve better than that. And you deserve better than to die because of my problems. The words burst from her with unexpected vehemence, revealing the fear that had been building inside her since overhearing their conversation. A charged silence fell over the room. Pete cleared his throat, nudging Miguel. "Think I hear Martha calling us," he muttered, and the two men tactfully withdrew, leaving Isaac and Abigail alone. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Isaac took a step closer, close enough that Abigail could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, could catch the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. "Your problems became mine the moment I decided to help you," he said softly. "And I don't regret that decision. Not for a second." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "You don't even know me." Isaac's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "I know enough. I know you're brave and kind. I know you faced an impossible choice and chose freedom, even knowing the risks. I know you've suffered losses that would break most people, yet here you stand, still fighting." His words washed over her like a warm tide, both comforting and unsettling in their intensity. No one had ever seen her so clearly, had valued her strength rather than her obedience or appearance. "I'm not worth dying for," she insisted, though the conviction in her voice had weakened. Isaac's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch so gentle it was barely there. "That's not for you to decide." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. For a heartbeat, Abigail thought he might kiss her, and more surprising still, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, Isaac stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should eat. Martha will have my hide if her stew gets cold." The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, something neither was quite ready to name, but both felt keenly. As they joined Pete, Martha, and Miguel for the simple but hearty meal, Abigail found herself studying Isaac surreptitiously, wondering at the complex man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. There was more to his determination to help her than simple kindness or even obligation, she was certain. But what drove him remained a mystery, one she was increasingly determined to solve. After supper, as the men huddled around the table with maps and whispered plans, Martha drew Abigail aside. "Come help me with these dishes, girl," she said, her tone brooking no argument. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, the older woman spoke again, her voice pitched low. "You care for him, don't you?" Abigail nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "I barely know him." Martha's knowing look spoke volumes. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to recognize what's important. I knew Pete was the one for me within a week of meeting him, been together 43 years now." "It's not like that," Abigail protested weakly. "He's helping me because he's a good man." "Oh, he is that," Martha agreed, scrubbing vigorously at a stubborn pot. "One of the best. But the way he looks at you when you're not watching, that's not just being good, girl." Heat rose to Abigail's cheeks. "You're mistaken." Martha shrugged, unconvinced. "Maybe so. But I've known that boy since he was young, never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Abigail could formulate a response, a commotion from the front of the trading post drew their attention. Raised voices, the scrape of chairs being pushed back hastily. They hurried from the kitchen to find a young miner, barely out of his teens, breathless and wide-eyed in the doorway. "Riders," he gasped. "Coming up the valley, 6, maybe 7 of them, armed." Isaac's gaze shot to Abigail, alarm evident in his expression. "How far?" 10 minutes, maybe less," the miner replied. They stopped at Jenkins' place asking questions. Pete immediately moved to a cabinet behind the bar, withdrawing several rifles. "Miguel, take the back. Isaac, get Miss Zimmerman upstairs." "Martha, I know what to do," Martha said grimly, already reaching for a shotgun leaning in the corner. Abigail found herself being hustled toward the stairs, Isaac's hand firm on her elbow. "Wait," she protested. "I can help, I know how to shoot." "Not this time," Isaac said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "If it's Blackwood's men, they're here for you. Best they don't see you at all." In the upstairs room, Isaac checked that the window was securely latched, then turned to Abigail with a seriousness that sent a chill through her. "Listen carefully," he said, pressing a small derringer into her hand. "If things go badly down there, use the back stairs. There's a trapdoor in Martha's pantry that leads to a root cellar. From there, a tunnel runs about 50 yards to an opening near the creek." "I'm not leaving without you," Abigail insisted, clutching the small pistol. Isaac's expression softened momentarily. "Stubborn woman," he murmured, the words carrying a warmth that belied their meaning. Then his face grew serious again. "Promise me, Abigail, promise you'll run if things turn bad." The intensity in his eyes made refusal impossible. "I promise," she whispered, knowing even as she spoke that it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Isaac nodded, satisfied. "Stay here, stay quiet." He turned to go, but Abigail caught his arm. "Isaac, be careful." For a moment, he simply looked at her, his gaze holding hers with an emotion too complex to name. Then, in a movement so swift she had no time to react, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss brief yet laden with unspoken feelings. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Abigail stood frozen, fingers pressed to lips that still tingled from his touch. The sound of horses approaching outside snapped her back to the present danger. Moving to the window, she peered cautiously through a gap in the curtains. 6 riders had reined in before the trading post, their faces hard in the fading light. With a jolt of fear, Abigail recognized her stepfather among them, his corpulent frame unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him sat a tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard whom she knew must be Roman Blackwood himself. She couldn't make out the words being exchanged as Pete emerged onto the porch, but the hostility was evident in every line of her stepfather's body. When Blackwood dismounted and approached the building, Abigail shrank back from the window, heart pounding. Muffled voices drifted up from below, occasionally rising in anger. Though she strained to hear, Abigail could make out only fragments denials from Pete, threats from Blackwood, her own name mentioned repeatedly. Then a single gunshot shattered the tense standoff. Chaos erupted. More shots followed, the sound of breaking glass, shouts, and curses. Abigail stood paralyzed with indecision, torn between her promise to Isaac and her desperate need to know what was happening. A cry of pain that sounded terrifyingly like Isaac's voice decided her. Promise or no promise, she couldn't hide while he was in danger. Gripping the derringer, she eased open the door and crept toward the stairs. The scene below was one of pandemonium. Furniture had been overturned to create makeshift barricades. Pete crouched behind the bar, exchanging fire with 2 of Blackwood's men who had taken cover near the entrance. Martha was nowhere to be seen, but Abigail could hear the boom of her shotgun from somewhere near the kitchen. And there was Isaac, locked in a desperate struggle with Blackwood himself, both men grappling for control of a knife that glinted wickedly in the lamplight. Blood stained Isaac's shirt, whether his own or his opponent's. Abigail couldn't tell. Her stepfather stood near the door, his face contorted with rage as he shouted orders to his hired guns. His gaze swept the room, and with a jolt of horror, Abigail realized he had spotted her on the stairs. "There she is," he bellowed. "Get her." One of the gunmen turned, raising his pistol toward Abigail. She froze, the derringer suddenly feeling impossibly small and inadequate in her hand. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and the gunman crumpled. Miguel appeared from the shadows of the back room, his expression grimly satisfied as he worked the lever of his Winchester. "Get down," he shouted to Abigail. She dropped to the stairs just as another shot whizzed overhead. Through the banister rails, she could see Isaac still struggling with Blackwood. With a surge of desperate strength, Isaac managed to slam his opponent against the wall, momentarily stunning him. Taking advantage of the moment, Isaac drew his revolver only to have Clayton Pierce barrel into him from the side, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. "You'll pay for interfering, boy," Pierce snarled, his face purple with rage as he and Isaac crashed to the ground. Abigail watched in horror as her stepfather drew a small pocket pistol from his vest. Without conscious thought, she raised the derringer and fired. The bullet struck Pierce's shoulder, causing him to howl in pain and drop his weapon. Isaac scrambled free, his shocked gaze finding Abigail on the stairs. In that moment of distraction, Blackwood recovered. With a roar of fury, he charged at Isaac, the knife still clutched in his hand. "Isaac?" Abigail screamed in warning. Isaac spun just in time to avoid the full force of the blade, but still cried out as it sliced across his ribs. Blackwood pressed his advantage, bearing down with all his considerable strength. Miguel attempted to take aim, but the struggling men were too closely entwined for a clear shot. Martha's shotgun boomed again from the kitchen doorway, dropping another of Blackwood's men. Abigail descended the stairs, desperate to help but unsure how. The derringer was empty now, useless in her hand. Then she saw Isaac's revolver where it had fallen near the overturned table. Keeping low, she made her way toward it, heart thundering in her ears. Her fingers had just closed around the grip when rough hands seized her from behind. One of Blackwood's remaining men dragged her upright, a knife pressed to her throat. "Enough," he shouted. "Drop your weapons or she dies." The room fell suddenly, terrifyingly silent. Pete slowly lowered his rifle. Miguel followed suit, his face dark with anger. Blackwood, seeing his advantage, stepped back from Isaac with a triumphant sneer. Well, well, the lady herself at last. Isaac remained half-crouched, blood seeping through his torn shirt, his eyes never leaving Abigail's. There was something in his gaze, a message she couldn't quite decipher, but which held an urgency that made her pulse quicken. "Let her go," Isaac said, his voice deadly calm despite his obvious pain. "This is between us, Blackwood," the cattle baron laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Between us? Boy, you're nothing to me, just a nuisance to be swatted aside." "A nuisance who's cost you men and time," Isaac replied evenly. "How will that look to your business associates, that you couldn't handle one cowboy and a woman?" Abigail realized what Isaac was doing, drawing attention to himself, away from her. She felt the grip of the man holding her shift slightly as he turned to watch the exchange. "You talk too much," Blackwood growled, raising his knife once more. "Time to end this." As he lunged toward Isaac, Abigail seized her moment. With all her strength, she drove her elbow into her captor's ribs, simultaneously stamping hard on his instep. His grip loosened in surprise, allowing her to twist free. In the same motion, she raised Isaac's revolver and fired. The bullet caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around. His knife clattered to the floor as he staggered backward, clutching at the wound with a howl of pain and rage. Isaac didn't waste the opportunity. He drove his fist into Blackwood's jaw with enough force to send the larger man crashing to the ground, unconscious. Abigail's former captor recovered quickly, lunging for her with a snarl. Before he could reach her, the butt of Miguel's rifle connected with the back of his head, dropping him like a stone. Clayton Pierce, still clutching his wounded shoulder, looked around at his fallen companions and the determined faces of those still standing. Whatever courage had driven him this far evidently deserted him. "This isn't over," he blustered, backing toward the door. "Blackwood has friends in high places. You'll never be safe." "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "I believe it is over." A tall figure stepped into the light, a man wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. Behind him stood several deputies, all armed and grim-faced. "Marshal Jenkins," Pete greeted with evident relief. "Right on time." The lawman surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. "Looks like you started the party without me." His gaze fell on Pierce and Blackwood. "Clayton Pierce and Roman Blackwood. Been wanting to have a word with you gentlemen about some outstanding warrants." As the deputies moved to secure the prisoners, Abigail rushed to Isaac's side. He had sunk onto a chair, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. "You're hurt," she said, gently moving his hand to examine the wound. "It's not deep," Isaac assured her, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his pain. "You were supposed to run." "I couldn't leave you," Abigail replied simply. "Not when I could help." Isaac's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Brave, foolish woman. Martha appeared with bandages and a basin of water, tutting disapprovingly at the state of Isaac's shirt. As she set about cleaning and binding his wound, the marshal approached them. "Miss Zimmerman, I presume?" he asked, tipping his hat respectfully. "I'd like to hear your side of this story, if you don't mind." Over the next hour, as the wounded were tended and the trading post restored to some semblance of order, Abigail recounted everything: her stepfather's gambling, his arrangement with Blackwood, her escape, and Isaac's intervention. The marshal listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small book. "That matches what we've heard from other sources," he said when she had finished. "Blackwood's been operating outside the law for years, but he's been careful. This time he overreached. What will happen to them?" Abigail asked. "Blackwood has outstanding warrants for extortion, assault, and suspected murder. He'll hang, most likely. As for Pierce..." The marshal shrugged. "Conspiracy, kidnapping, assault. He'll see the inside of a territorial prison for a good long while." Relief washed over Abigail like a cleansing rain. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Marshal," she said sincerely. Jenkins nodded, then turned to Isaac. "Fuller, good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Isaac, now bandaged and sipping a glass of whiskey for the pain, managed a wry smile. "Likewise, Marshal. You know each other?" Abigail asked, surprised. "Isaac rode with me for a spell after the war," Jenkins explained. "One of the best deputies I ever had, until he decided to go his own way." This new piece of Isaac's past intrigued Abigail, but before she could ask more, the marshal continued. "Speaking of which, that offer still stands. Could use a man like you, especially now that this territory's growing." Isaac's gaze flickered to Abigail, then back to Jenkins. "Appreciate that, Marshal, but I've got other plans now." The lawman followed his glance and smiled knowingly. "I see. Well, the offer remains open, should those plans allow for it." As the marshal and his deputies prepared to depart with their prisoners, Abigail found herself standing beside Isaac on the trading post's porch. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the velvet sky like diamond dust. "What happens now?" she asked softly, acutely aware of his presence beside her. Isaac was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "That depends on you," he finally said. "You're free now, Abigail, free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose." The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I hardly know where to begin," she admitted. "Everything happened so fast." "You mentioned wanting to teach," Isaac reminded her. "Durango's growing, they'll be needing school teachers." Abigail turned to face him fully. "Is that where you're heading? Durango?" Something vulnerable flickered in Isaac's eyes. "I thought I might. Jenkins is right, territory's growing, plenty of work for a man who knows horses and cattle. And if I decided to go elsewhere?" Abigail asked, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. Isaac's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "Then I'd have a decision to make." The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with words unspoken but felt deeply. Abigail took a step closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "What if I asked you to come with me?" she whispered. "Wherever I decided to go." Isaac's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch so gentle it made her heart ache. "Is that what you want, Abigail?" "I don't know what I want yet," she answered honestly. Except that I don't want to face it alone." For a heartbeat, uncertainty clouded his features. Then, with a soft sigh, he drew her into his arms, careful of his injured side. "You don't have to," he murmured against her hair. "Not if you don't want to." Abigail leaned into his embrace, feeling safer than she had in years. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Not of Blackwood or my stepfather anymore, but of feeling this way about someone I've known for so short a time." Isaac pulled back just enough to meet her gaze. "Time doesn't always matter, sometimes you just know." "Know what?" she breathed, though her heart already knew the answer. Instead of replying, Isaac lowered his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke volumes, gentle at first, then deepening as Abigail responded, her arms slipping around his neck. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I know that I want to be wherever you are," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of a joy so unexpected and complete it overwhelmed her. "I'll have you," she whispered. "I'll have you." 2 months later, the schoolhouse in Durango rang with children's laughter as Abigail dismissed her class for the day. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the simple gold band on her left hand as she gathered her books and papers. Outside, Isaac waited with their horses, his smile warming as she emerged into the bright autumn afternoon. His side had healed well, leaving only a thin scar to mark the events of that night at the trading post. "How were the little hellions today?" he asked, helping her mount. Abigail laughed, the sound free and unencumbered. "Perfect angels, of course, though Tommy Miller did put a frog in Sarah Johnson's lunch pail." They rode side by side through the bustling streets of Durango, exchanging greetings with townspeople who had quickly accepted the new schoolteacher and her quiet husband. Their small cabin on the outskirts of town was modest but comfortable, with room for the garden Abigail had started and the workshop where Isaac trained and shoed horses. Life wasn't perfect, they worked hard for every comfort, and sometimes the memories of that desperate flight through the mountains woke Abigail in the night. But Isaac was always there, his arms strong around her, his voice soothing in the darkness. As they reached their home, Isaac dismounted first, then reached up to help Abigail down. Instead of immediately releasing her, he kept his hands at her waist, his expression suddenly serious. "What is it?" Abigail asked, concerned by the change in his demeanor. Isaac hesitated, then drew a deep breath. "I got a letter from Jenkins today. He's offering me a permanent position as his deputy." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. That's wonderful news, isn't it?" "It would mean more time away from home," Isaac said carefully. "More risk, too." "I wanted to discuss it with you before giving him an answer." The consideration in his words, the way he included her in this decision about their future, filled Abigail with a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "You want the position?" she asked, resting her hands on his chest. Isaac's eyes searched hers. "Part of me does. I was good at it before, felt like I was making a difference." He paused. "But things are different now. I have you to consider." Abigail smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "And I have you to consider." "If this is something you want, Isaac, then I support you. We'll make it work." Relief and love mingled in his expression. "You're sure?" "I'm sure about us," she said simply. "Everything else we'll figure out together." Isaac pulled her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not. When they parted, he kept her in the circle of his arms, his expression softening into the smile that was hers alone. "I love you, Abigail Fuller," he murmured. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting with the miracle of their shared life. Now and always. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the land they now called home, Abigail thought of the desperate young woman who had fled into the wilderness all those months ago. How frightened she had been, how alone. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her momentary introspection. Abigail smiled up at him, taking his hand and leading him toward their cabin. "I was thinking about promises kept." And as they crossed the threshold together, Abigail knew with unshakable certainty that of all the promises in her life, those broken, and those honored, the most important was the one Isaac had made that night in the mountains when she had whispered, "Don't leave me here," and the cowboy had answered, I'll never leave you again. It was a promise that, against all odds, they would keep for all their days.